I'd like for us to go back and to think about the time when the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. They were working day after day in the sun, producing bricks, making bricks for Pharaoh's empire. And Moses had a vision. You can be free. Just got to tell Pharaoh. And there was a little bit of consternation there from Moses saying, are you serious? You want me to go to Pharaoh and tell him that my people need to be free? And he goes up to Pharaoh and he does say, let my people go. And does Pharaoh take this well? What do you remember from this story? I mean, it wasn't like just overnight they were free, right? Pharaoh doesn't quite take this well. And he was really, really angry by this. And he says to Moses, that's it, no more straw for your bricks. I want the same number of bricks, but I'm not going to give you the straw. And so that meant that the people had to then go through the fields, gather the straw, bring it back, chop it down to size, and then get it ready for the brick production to begin. So essentially, more work, fewer resources, no rest. And so that phrase, bricks without straw, became to represent Pharaoh's way of ruling things. That Pharaoh rules with endless demand, endless production, endless pressure. I'm so glad we're out from Pharaoh's rule, right? You guys are really silent. Not so sure about that, are you? Walter Brueggemann wrote this book called Sabbath as Resistance. And he talks about how Pharaoh, that notion of bricks without straw, that notion that Pharaoh isn't gone. He talks about this. He says, if we're honest with ourselves, our capitalism, our consumerism, our productivity, this culture of productivity we live in, just might be Pharaoh under a different name. That it all boils down to that in our culture, we're only as good as what we produce. But there's a lot of connection between our personal value and what we do, how we do, and how much we do of it. Does that make sense? Anyone relate to this? But God, in the time of slavery and in today's time, gives us Sabbath. And you can think about Sabbath in two different ways. You can think of it as on the seventh day, God created the world and then God rested. And that we are called to mimic God in that resting. That's from Exodus 20. Or you can think about it from Deuteronomy also. It says that they take Sabbath as a reminder of their liberation. That they can actually take a day of rest. They are no longer under Pharaoh's control. Remember that you are slaves in Egypt and keep Sabbath to remember the Exodus. So to think of it more like a mini Exodus from all the things that are like Pharaoh. And when we sit in that Sabbath, and when we set it into our rhythm of life, this becomes a rhythm about freedom. Everyone rests, no matter who you are. No longer in those moments of Sabbath is your worth measured by production. You are called to sit in those moments and remember that your worth is rooted in God's love. So if we were to fast forward to today's gospel, and this woman who has been crippled for 18 years, and Jesus heals her on a Sabbath, and they're really annoyed. They're like, You had 6 days to heal her, Jesus, and you heal her on the one day that everyone, including you, if healing is rest, you should have rest as well. But Jesus is like, oh yeah, no, God doesn't work that way. She has been like this for 18 years. Not one more day should pass before she experiences this freedom. That you're making Sabbath into a list of rules, creating a little Pharaoh of your own. That Sabbath is to remind us that we are freed from all bondages. This woman's physical bondage and our cultural bondages. These rules that hold us back, distorting us from measuring worth due to a set of rules or how much we produce. Where's God in that? That's what Jesus was saying. And so Jesus invites us into this life of freedom and Sabbath, and we are called to name the pharaohs of today. I have pharaohs on my phone. If you leave it alone and you click on the screen, you can see how many messages I've missed, right? Or in the inbox, that number that just keeps coming up over and over and again, pressuring us to keep going every day, to answer emails all the time. Pharaoh can be that pressure to measure in likes, that pressure to measure in metrics, grades, or dollars. And it's not just external. I've been naming all these external things. It's also internal. For me, the drive to stay busy. I'm a doer. I like to be busy. And sometimes I stay busy so that I don't have to face grief or something else about ourselves. As a way to stay busy, to keep it at arm's length, to avoid. But Jesus is offering us another way. Just as he healed that woman's body and he healed the whole community's sense of what Sabbath could be, to reclaim it for what it's called to be about not restriction but restoration, not obligation or rules but freedom. Not production, but love. And if we lean into God's liberation and lean into that rhythm, we might start to see God's liberation breaking out in our lives. So think about that. Where are we adding Sabbath to our lives? So just more than 1 hour on Sunday, right? But in every moment when we can dare to step outside of Pharaoh's grip. We take a moment of silence after the sermon. And so I'm going to invite you to not look at what's next. I do that. Not think about the things that you need to do. You can tell your brain, thank you, brain. Not this moment. And just be in that moment of silence. Breathe. Or maybe for you, it's a joy of sharing a meal without a device or without being in a hurry. Or maybe it's walking in nature just to walk. Or maybe it's just to have the courage to let ourselves face the grief or questions that we've been trying to outrun or numb. See, every little act of Sabbath is a rehearsal of God's freedom. The time to just sit and be reminded that we are loved by God and we are called to be God's beloved. We're not slaves to production or commodities or whatever else slaves us, that we are God's beloved. So Pharaoh counts bricks, but God counts love. And that's how we are measured. So go out and live that love. Amen.